In the stillness of the night, a whisper rises from the sands of time. Ancient Egypt. From the towering pyramids of Giza to the forgotten shores of the Predynastic Nile, we invite you to explore a world rebuilt from 3,000 pages of academic secrets and 14 3D archaeological landscapes. Close your eyes and settle into the deep dark of the past as we embark on a journey through the birth, the fall, and the radiant restoration of the Pharaohs. This is Noctivara Stories. Welcome to a journey through the corridors of time, where the sands of the Sahara hold secrets far older than the Great Pyramids. Tonight, we settle into the stillness of the deep past, venturing into an era known to scholars as the Predynastic, a time when the foundations of the world's most enduring civilization were being laid, not in stone, but in the hearts and hands of the first settlers along the Nile. Close your eyes and let the rhythmic flow of the river carry you back over 5,000 years to a landscape that is both familiar and profoundly alien. In the grand narrative of history, we often begin with the kings, the great unifiers like Narmer or the architects of the Old Kingdom. But to truly understand the soul of Egypt, we must look further back into the silent dawn before the first hieroglyph was ever carved. Our story begins in the mid-5th millennium BCE with the people known as the Badarians. Named after the site of El-Badari in Middle Egypt, these people represent the earliest identifiable agricultural culture in Upper Egypt. They did not leave behind sprawling cities or towering monuments, yet the archaeological records curated by the Petrie Museum reveal a world of immense complexity and spiritual depth. Imagine the Nile Valley as it was then. The climate was more humid than the arid desert we know today. The fringes of the valley were lush with scrubland, and the great river was a wild, untamed force. For the Badarians, the river was not just a source of water, but the very pulse of existence. They lived in small, semi-permanent settlements, likely constructed of reeds and mud, materials that have long since returned to the earth. Yet, it is in their cities of the dead that their story remains preserved. The Badarian cemeteries, excavated with meticulous care by early archaeologists like Flinders Petrie and Guy Brunton, offer us a window into their worldview. As we walk through these ancient burial grounds in our mind's eye, notice the intimacy of the graves. These were simple oval pits dug into the desert edge, away from the fertile silt. The deceased were placed in a fetal position, wrapped in animal skins or reed mats, always facing the west, the direction of the setting sun, where the journey into the afterlife was thought to begin. Even at this early stage, we see the seeds of the Egyptian obsession with eternity. They did not leave their loved ones empty-handed. Beside the bodies, we find the first masterpieces of Egyptian art, the Badarian pottery. This pottery is unlike anything else in the ancient world. It is exceptionally thin-walled, often finished with a distinctive rippled surface created by combing the wet clay before firing. The most iconic vessels are the black-topped red wares. Through a sophisticated firing process where the top of the pot was buried in organic matter to create a localized oxygen-depleted environment, the Badarians achieved a deep, metallic black rim that contrasts sharply with the vibrant terracotta body. To hold such a vessel today is to feel the tactile precision of a craftsman who lived 6,000 years ago. This was not merely functional. It was a statement of aesthetic mastery and perhaps a vessel for the sustenance required in the world beyond. But the Badarians were more than just potters. They were the first in the Nile Valley to experiment with copper, hammering the native ore into small tools and pins. They were also masters of stone and bone, carving delicate spoons, combs, and figurines from ivory. Look closely at these ivory carvings. They often depict animals, the hippopotamus, the gazelle, the bird, showing a profound connection to the fauna that shared their world. There is a sense of ma'at, or balance even here, in the way they observed and replicated the natural order. Perhaps most intriguing is the evidence of social stratification. In the Badarian cemeteries, not every grave is equal. Some burials contain wealth far beyond the average. Beads of carnelian, jasper, and even turquoise brought from the distant Sinai. This tells us that even in the 5th millennium BCE, the people of the Nile were part of a vast, interlocking network of trade and exchange. They were not isolated. They were the northern anchor of a bridge between Africa and the Near East. The presence of these exotic materials suggests the emergence of a prestige economy, where certain individuals held the power to acquire and display rare goods, a precursor to the divine authority of the later pharaohs. As the centuries turned into the 4th millennium BCE, the Badarian culture began to transition, almost imperceptibly, into what we call the Noctivara period, or the Amration. The focus of cultural gravity shifted slightly south to sites like Naqada and Hierakonpolis. Hierakonpolis, or Nekhen, would become the city of the hawk, a sacred center that would eventually birth the first kings of Egypt. In these early phases of Naqada, we see a continuation of Badarian traditions, but with an increasing scale of ambition. The pottery remains black-topped, but it is joined by white cross-lined where vessels painted with geometric patterns, hunting scenes, and the first depictions of human figures engaged in ritual dance. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile as the sun dips below the horizon. The air is cool, and the sound of the river is a constant, low-frequency hum. Around you, the smoke from cooking fires rises into a sky thick with stars. You are part of a community that understands the cycles of the stars as intimately as the cycles of the flood. You see the world not as a collection of objects, but as a living tapestry of spirits and forces. The tools you use, the pots you fire, and the way you bury your ancestors are all threads in this tapestry. In this first part of our exploration, we have touched the very beginning of the thread. We have seen how the Badarians established the fundamental tenets of Egyptian life. The importance of the Nile, the belief in an afterlife, the mastery of materials, and the birth of social hierarchy. These were not primitive people. They were the pioneers of the human spirit, navigating a world of mystery with courage and creativity. The silent dawn is beginning to break. The shadows of the Predynastic are long, but the light is growing. As we move forward in our journey, we will see these small settlements grow into powerful chiefdoms, and these simple graves evolve into the precursors of the royal mastabas. We will witness the birth of the first symbols of power and the agonizingly slow, yet inevitable, march toward unification. But for now, stay here in the stillness of the Badarian night. Feel the cool desert sand beneath you and listen to the whisper of the reeds. The foundation has been laid. The story of Egypt has begun, and the silence of the dawn is about to be filled with the voices of the first kings. In our next chapter, we will venture deeper into the Naqada periods, where the city of the hawk begins to exert its influence, and the first true signs of an organized, militaristic, and highly ritualized society begin to emerge from the dust of the desert. The echoes of the Badarian whispers still linger in the cool night air, but as we watch the horizon, the first true light of the 4th millennium BCE begins to illuminate the valley. The semi-nomadic existence of the past is yielding to something more fixed, more formidable. We are entering the era known as Naqada, or the Amration period, a time when the scattered seeds of the Nile settlers began to coalesce into the first true centers of power. The stillness of the early dawn is now punctuated by the sound of more organized labor. The rhythmic thud of stone against stone, the crackle of larger kilns, and the steady splashing of oars against the rising tide. Our focus shifts slightly southward, following the river's bend to two pivotal locations that would define the destiny of Egypt. Naqada, known in antiquity as Nut, the city of gold, and Hierakonpolis, or Nekhen, the city of the hawk. In these burgeoning settlements, the archaeological evidence from the Petrie Museum reveals a society undergoing a profound transformation. The simple oval pits of the Badarians are evolving into larger, more rectangular graves, and the contents within speak of a people who were no longer merely surviving, but beginning to master their environment and their social hierarchy. As you walk along the desert edge of Noctivara, imagine the vastness of the cemeteries. Thousands of graves are laid out in an orderly fashion, suggesting a community with a clear sense of space and lineage. In this period, the black-topped pottery we admired in the Badarian era reaches its zenith of refinement, but it is joined by a new, more expressive medium, the white cross-lined ware or seaware. These vessels, made from the rich Nile silt, are painted with a creamy white pigment. Close your eyes and visualize the patterns. Geometric zigzags representing the ripples of the river, delicate renderings of local flora, and for the first time, vivid scenes of the hunt. In these depictions, we see the pre-dynastic Egyptians' world in motion. Hippopotamuses are pursued by men in small reed boats. Gazelles leap across the curved surface of a jar. There is a raw, kinetic energy here. It is not just art, it is a narrative of dominion. To capture the image of the wild beast was to exert a form of magical control over the chaos of nature. Among these figures, we occasionally see a human form that stands taller than the rest, perhaps wearing a distinctive headdress or carrying a staff. These are the big men of the Amration, the nascent leaders who were beginning to consolidate authority through their skill in the hunt and their ability to mediate with the divine forces of the valley. The transition from Noctivara I to Noctivara II, often called the Gurzian period, circa 3500 BCE, marks a dramatic shift in the atmospheric tone of our story. The humid green Sahara was rapidly drying out, pushing more people into the narrow, fertile strip of the Nile. This environmental pressure acted as a crucible, forging a more complex and competitive society. The pottery changes again, reflecting a shift in technology and worldview. The fragile black-topped wares are replaced by decorated ware or D-ware, made from a hard, buff-colored marl clay found in the desert wadis. The D-ware pottery is the hallmark of the Noctivara II period, and its imagery is dominated by one recurring motif: the boat. These are not the simple papyrus skiffs of the hunters, but large, multi-oared vessels equipped with cabins and standards. The standards, early prototypes of the nomes or provincial symbols, suggest that the Nile had become a bustling highway of commerce and communication. The river was no longer a barrier, it was the spine of a growing body politic. The boat on a D-ware jar is a symbol of movement, of trade, and of the seasonal journey of the sun. It hints at a budding theology where the gods themselves traveled across the sky in celestial barks. Now let us turn our gaze to Hierakonpolis, the site that the sources identify as one of the most significant archaeological landscapes in the world. Here, the scale of human ambition becomes truly visible. In the area known to archaeologists as HK 29A, we find the remains of a massive ceremonial center, perhaps the earliest temple in Egypt. Imagine a large, paved courtyard surrounded by a wall of wooden posts. At one end stood a tall, central pole, likely topped with the image of a hawk, the god Horus. This was not a place for the masses, but a sacred enclosure for the elite to perform rituals that ensured the fertility of the land and the stability of the cosmos. At Hierakonpolis, we also see the first evidence of specialized industry on a grand scale. Excavations have uncovered massive breweries capable of producing hundreds of gallons of beer in a single batch. This was not merely for refreshment. In a society without currency, beer and bread were the primary means of payment and social control. The ability of a leader at Hierakonpolis to distribute surplus grain in the form of beer meant he could command the labor of hundreds, if not thousands. This is the birth of the administrative state, fueled by the bounty of the silt and the organizational genius of the first lords of Nekhen. The social divide is widening. While the majority of the population still rests in modest graves, The elite are being buried in increasingly elaborate mansions of eternity. In the elite cemetery at Hierakonpolis, $6 we find graves of unprecedented size, containing not only exquisite jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli, but also the remains of exotic animals, elephants, baboons, and wild bulls. These animals were not just pets. They were symbols of the ruler's power to conquer the wild and bring it into the heart of the settlement. To own an elephant in 3400 BCE was to possess a power that bordered on the supernatural. As the Naqada II period progresses, the reach of these Nile centers expands far beyond the valley. The sources describe a Naqada expansion, where the cultural and material styles of Upper Egypt begin to appear in the delta and even as far as the southern Levant. Trade networks are stretching toward the east, bringing in silver from the islands of the Mediterranean and cedar from the mountains of Lebanon. The City of Gold was earning its name, processing the precious ores from the eastern desert to trade for the luxuries of the known world. The atmosphere of this period is one of restless energy. The small, peaceful villages of the Badarian past are now part of a competitive landscape of warring chiefdoms. The mace head, a blunt and brutal weapon of war, becomes a symbol of office. We see it depicted in the hands of rulers, used to smite enemies in a pose that would remain a central theme of Egyptian royal art for the next 3,000 years. The peace of the dawn is being replaced by the tension of a gathering storm. Stay with me here, in the shadow of the great hawk pole of Hierakonpolis. The air is thick with the scent of brewing beer and the dust of the desert. You can feel the weight of history shifting. The scattered tribes are becoming a people. The people are becoming a nation. The concepts of kingship, divinity, and the eternal state are no longer distant dreams. They are being carved into the very landscape of the Nile. But the final step toward unification is yet to come. The rivalries between the great centers of Naqada and Hierakonpolis are intensifying, and a new power is rising further north at Abydos. The stage is being set for the arrival of the scorpion and the catfish, the legendary rulers who would finally bind the two lands into one. As the light of Naqada II fades into the twilight of the Predynastic, the silence is gone. In its place is the roar of an emerging empire, and the first true kings of the south are preparing to claim their place in the sun. The twilight of the 4th millennium BCE deepens, and the air over the Nile Valley grows heavy with a new kind of silence, the expectant hush that precedes a storm. As we leave the bustling markets of Naqada and the sacred shrines of Hierakonpolis, we follow the river further north to a place of profound spiritual gravity, Abydos, known to the ancients as Abydos. Here, amidst the stark limestone cliffs and the shifting desert sands, the final chapters of the Predynastic Era are being written, not just in memory, but in the very first symbols of a language that would outlive the stars. Tonight, we step into the era scholars call Naqada III, or the Proto-Dynastic period, circa 3200 to 3000 BCE. This is the age of Dynasty Zero, a time when the rival chiefdoms we explored previously have coalesced into a few powerful regional states, each vying for the ultimate prize, the total dominion of the Nile. The landscape of power has shifted toward the Tenite region, where the rulers of Abydos are beginning to lay the foundations of the world's first true nation-state. Close your eyes and imagine the sacred landscape of Amelqueb, the mother of pots, at Abydos. In the cool, starlit dark of the desert, you stand before a field of graves that will one day house the first kings of Egypt. But before the great brick tombs of the First Dynasty were built, there was Cemetery U. In 1988, archaeologists uncovered a tomb here known as UJ, a discovery that fundamentally altered our understanding of human history. Tomb UJ belonged to a ruler of immense wealth and influence, possibly a king named Scorpion. It was a sprawling, subterranean complex of 12 chambers, built to mimic the layout of a palace. As we descend into its shadows, The smell of ancient cedar and dried resins fills the air. Within these chambers, researchers found hundreds of small bone and ivory tags, each no larger than a postage stamp. These tags are the earliest evidence of phonetic writing in Egypt. Carved with delicate images of birds, mountains, and celestial symbols, they were labels for goods. Wine jars from the Levant and oils from the Delta, marking their origin and quantity. Here, in the flickering light of an oil lamp, we see the birth of the administrative genius of Egypt. Writing was not born of poetry, but of the need to organize the bounty of an empire. The presence of wine jars from the northern Mediterranean in a southern grave tells a story of an interlocking world. The rulers of Abydos were not just warriors. They were merchant princes who controlled the flow of exotic luxuries. The Naqada expansion we discussed earlier has now reached its peak. To the north, the indigenous Madi-Buto cultures of the Delta are being absorbed, their distinct pottery styles replaced by the sophisticated wares of the south. Whether this unification was achieved through the slow creep of cultural hegemony or the sudden violence of the macehead is a secret the sands keep well. But the result is undeniable. The Nile was becoming one. In this atmosphere of rising power, we encounter the legendary figures of Dynasty 0. Imagine the figure of King Scorpion II, his name immortalized on a massive macehead found at Hierakonpolis. In this iconic image, the king wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, standing by a riverbank with a hoe in his hands. He is performing a ritual of irrigation, cutting a canal to bring the life-giving waters of the Nile to the parched earth. Around him, standards of different provinces are shown with lapwinged birds, representing the common people, hanging from them. It is a stark depiction of the king as both the provider of life and the absolute master of his subjects. The air is thick with the symbolism of the two lands. We see the emergence of the red crown of the north and the white crown of the south, symbols that would eventually merge into the skent, the double crown of a unified Egypt. The rulers are no longer just big men. They are becoming living gods, the earthly incarnations of Horus the hawk. They are the followers of Horus, traveling the length of the river in grand processions to collect taxes and dispense justice, turning the seasonal flood into a clock of state power. As we move toward the final transition, we meet the figure who stands on the very threshold of history, Narmer. Often identified with the legendary Menes, Narmer is the bridge between the Predynastic mist and the solid stone of the Pharaonic age. Visualize the Narmer palette, a magnificent slab of siltstone preserved in the annals of the Petrie Museum's research. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown, his arm raised in the timeless gesture of smiting an enemy. On the reverse, he wears the red crown, marching in a victory procession past the decapitated bodies of his foes. Look closely at the center of the palette. Two mythical beasts, the serpopards, their incredibly long necks intertwined and held in check by servants. This is the ultimate metaphor for the unification of Egypt. The chaotic, competing forces of the north and south have been tamed and brought into a state of ma'at, divine balance. The two lands are no longer rivals. They are the twin pillars of a single house. Above them, the face of the cow goddess Bat, later Hathor, watches over the king, signifying that this union is sanctioned by the heavens themselves. The silent dawn we have followed for so long has finally broken into a brilliant, golden morning. The small farming communities of the Badarian era, the competitive chiefdoms of Naqada, and the ambitious lords of Hierakonpolis have all merged into a single colossal entity. The stage is set at Memphis, the new white walls capital founded at the balance point between the delta and the valley. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the first royal court of the First Dynasty. The scribes are sharpening their reeds, the architects are measuring the first royal mastabas, and the Nile flows steadily past, carrying the decrees of a man who calls himself the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Predynastic Era has ended, but its soul, The obsession with the afterlife, the mastery of the river, and the search for eternal order is now the soul of Egypt itself. The whispers of the desert are now the proclamations of a god-king. The long road to unification has been traveled, and a 3,000-year journey of splendor is about to begin. In our next chapter, we will walk through the gates of the First Dynasty, where the names of Horaha, Jur, and the great Queen Mernith await us in the shadows of the earliest palaces. The golden morning of a unified Egypt has arrived. The chaos of the predynastic struggles has been tamed, and the crimson horizon we witnessed at Abydos has given way to the steady, enduring light of the First Dynasty. As we continue our journey through the digital Egypt archives, we find ourselves at the strategic heart of this new world, the city of Memphis. Known in the ancient tongue as Enebhedge or the White Walls, this city was founded at the delicate balance point where the narrow valley of the south opens into the vast, fan-like delta of the north. Close your eyes and imagine the rising sun reflecting off the whitewashed mud brick enclosures of the king's palace, a beacon of order in a world that had only recently known the unity of a single crown. This era, the early dynastic period, circa 3000 to 2890 BCE, is the time of the great consolidators. Following Narmer, we encounter the reign of Horaha, whose name translates simply as the fighter. He is the king who truly begins to build the infrastructure of a nation. Under Horaha, the administrative machine we saw whispering in the small ivory tags of Tomb Uj begins to roar. From the Petrie Museum's records of sites like Tarkhan and Helwan, we see evidence of a burgeoning bureaucracy. No longer is the king merely a local warlord. He is the center of a celestial court, surrounded by kinsmen and high-ranking officials who govern the land in his name. Tarkhan, a site located just south of Memphis, offers us a profound look into this social shift. Here, Flinders Petrie excavated one of the largest cemeteries of the First Dynasty. Imagine row upon row of rectangular mud brick tombs, or mastabas, rising from the desert floor like a city for the dead. These were the eternal homes of the elite, the scribes, the overseers, and the craftsmen who made the dream of a unified Egypt a reality. In these graves, we find some of the oldest preserved clothing in the world, finely woven linen shirts that still carry the creases of their wearers. These garments speak of a society that valued elegance and precision, a world where the weaver's loom was as important as the soldier's mace. But to witness the true spiritual heart of the First Dynasty, we must return to the sacred sands of Abydos, specifically to the site of Amelchuaib. Here, the kings of this era constructed their royal tombs, vast, subterranean palaces of mud brick and timber. As we walk through the silent ruins in our mind's eye, notice the evolution from the simple pits of the past. The tomb of King Jur, the successor to Horaha, is a masterpiece of early engineering. It was a massive rectangular pit, lined with thick brick walls and roofed with heavy timber beams, topped by a hidden mound of sand and gravel. Around the main burial chamber of Jur, however, lies one of the most haunting and atmospheric features of the First Dynasty, the subsidiary burials. In a practice that remains one of the great mysteries of the early dynastic period, hundreds of retainers, officials, servants, and even harem members were buried simultaneously around their king. There is a profound, almost chilling silence to these orderly rows of small graves. Were they volunteers who chose to follow their divine master into the next life? Or was this a final, brutal display of royal absolute power? The archaeological record shows that these individuals were buried with their own personal items, copper tools, ivory combs, and jars of food, suggesting they were expected to continue their service in the eternal court. This period also brings us the story of one of history's first truly powerful women, Queen Mernith. In the royal cemetery at Abydos, her tomb stands as large and grand as those of the kings themselves. She likely ruled as regent for her young son, Den, proving that from the very dawn of the Pharaonic age, women held a place of immense status and potential authority. To stand before her funerary stela, now a silent stone sentinel, is to recognize the early roots of the great queens like Hatshepsut and Nefertiti, who would follow millennia later. The atmosphere of the First Dynasty is one of intense creative explosion. The Digital Egypt sources highlight the incredible advancement in craftsmanship. The stone vessels of this era are legendary. Imagine a craftsman sitting in the shade of a courtyard, patiently boring through a block of hard diorite or translucent calcite with a copper drill and abrasive sand. The resulting bowls and jars are so perfectly symmetrical, with walls so thin they are almost translucent, that they seem to defy the technology of 5,000 years ago. These were not just containers, they were symbols of Ma'at, the divine order that the king brought to the chaos of raw material. Look closely at the ivory carvings from the reign of King Jet, often called Waj or the Serpent. One of the most famous objects from this time is a small ivory comb depicting the hawk god Horus standing on a celestial boat, with his wings outstretched to encompass the stars. It is a stunning visual metaphor for the king's role as the cosmic mediator. The world was no longer just the river and the desert. It was a cosmic architecture where the king ensured that the sun rose and the Nile flooded in their proper seasons. As the reign of King Den begins, we see even further innovation. He is the first king depicted wearing the double crown regularly, and he is the one who introduces the use of hard stone, like granite, into the royal architecture at Abydos. His tomb features a floor paved with blocks of red and black granite brought from the distant quarries of Aswan, a feat of logistics that required transporting tons of stone over hundreds of miles against the current of the Nile. The era of the First Dynasty is one of a young, confident empire testing its limits. The boundaries of the world are expanding. Expeditions are sent to the turquoise mines of the Sinai and the gold mines of the eastern desert. The white walls of Memphis are not just a palace, but the headquarters of a global superpower in its infancy. As we linger in the shadows of the Abydos tombs, the desert wind whispers the names of these first kings: Aha, Jur, Jet, Mernith, Denver. They were the architects of a legacy that would endure for 30 centuries. They transformed the tribal loyalties of the Predynastic into the national identity of a people who believed their king was a god and their land was the center of the universe. The first great chapter of Pharaonic Egypt is nearing its climax. But as we will see in our next episode, the stability of the First Dynasty would soon be challenged by internal strife and religious shifts, leading to the rise of the Second Dynasty and a period of mysterious transition that would pave the way for the age of the true giants, the pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom. Stay here in the cool, torchlit chambers of the early dynastic court. Feel the weight of the linen, the smoothness of the calcite, and the absolute certainty of a world governed by the white walls. The foundations are deep, and the pillars of the First Dynasty are strong, holding up the sky of an Egypt that has finally found its voice. The monumental stability of the First Dynasty, which once seemed as unyielding as the limestone cliffs of the Nile, begins to ripple like a reflection on disturbed water. As we venture into the era of the Second Dynasty, circa 2890 to 2686 BCE, the atmospheric tone of our journey shifts. The triumphant unity of Narmer and the administrative precision of the white walls at Memphis find themselves facing a landscape of profound internal transition. Tonight, we step into a period that the sources reveal as a time of mystery, religious tension, and a struggle for the very soul of the two lands. Imagine the transition from the First to the Second Dynasty not as a violent collapse, but as a subtle, chilling change in the wind. The first king of this new line, Hotep II, chose a name that serves as both a prayer and a political declaration. The two powers are at peace. In the deep stillness of the ancient night, this name echoes with the weight of a hard-won reconciliation. For reasons the desert sands have not fully surrendered, the royal burial ground shifted from the ancestral dunes of Abydos to the north, to the limestone plateau of Saqqara, overlooking the capital of Memphis. Close your eyes and visualize the underground world of Saqqara. Beneath the sun-baked surface, the Second Dynasty architects carved immense, labyrinthine galleries into the solid bedrock. Unlike the brick-built tombs of the past, these were subterranean cities for the dead. The tomb of Hotep-Sekhemwy is a sprawling network of corridors and storerooms stretching over 100 meters into the dark earth. As we walk through these cold, silent passages in our mind's eye, the scent of damp stone and ancient dust surrounds us. These galleries once held thousands of stone vessels and jars of oil, the material wealth of a state that was learning to bury its secrets deeper than ever before. The early kings of this dynasty, such as Ranab and Ninetjer, maintained this focus on the northern capital. Ninetjer's reign, recorded in the fragmentary chronicles of the time, suggests an era of great administrative complexity and the ritual following of Horus. But as the centuries of the Second Dynasty progressed, the harmony hinted at by Hotep-Sekhemwy began to fracture. We enter a period of shadow kings, rulers whose names appear fitfully in the archaeological record, like flickering torches in a vast, drafty hall. It is here that we encounter one of the most intriguing religious and political crises in all of human history, the Schism of the Serech. In the center of this storm stands a king named Peribsen. In an act that must have sent shockwaves through the priesthoods of the Nile, Peribsen did the unthinkable. He replaced the falcon of Horus, which had topped the royal Serech since the dawn of time, with the enigmatic, square-eared creature of the god Seth, the deity of the wild desert, storms, and chaotic power. Imagine the atmosphere of this time, one of divided loyalties and spiritual unease. Peribsen returned to the ancestral grounds of Abydos for his burial, turning his back on the northern galleries of Saqqara. Was this a regional rebellion from the south, a religious civil war between the followers of the sky god and the lord of the desert? The sources show a kingdom physically united but spiritually drifting, pulled between the established order of the falcon and the raw, untamed power of the Seth animal. But as the Second Dynasty neared its end, a figure emerged who would not only heal this rift, but would build the largest monuments the world had ever seen up to that point. His name was Sekhemwy, and his legacy is carved into the very bones of the desert. Sekhemwy was a master of reconciliation. In a brilliant stroke of theological diplomacy, he topped his royal name with both the falcon of Horus and the beast of Seth, crowned with the double crown of a unified Egypt. His name, the two powers appear in glory, was a definitive reclamation of unity. To understand the scale of his ambition, we must return to the sacred landscape of Abydos. Imagine standing before the Shunet el-Zebib, Sekhemwy's massive funerary enclosure. Even today, its mud brick walls stand over 10 meters high, a colossal fortress for the king's spirit. It is the oldest standing royal monument of this scale in the world. Within its vast, empty courtyard, the silence is absolute. The scale of the brickwork, millions of bricks laid with mathematical precision, foreshadows the labor that would soon build the pyramids. Near this enclosure, researchers found a fleet of wooden boats buried in the sand, shining barks intended to carry the king across the celestial waters of the afterlife. Sekhemwy did not stop at brick. He was the first to introduce large-scale stone masonry into royal architecture on a transformative level. In his tomb at Abydos, we find a central burial chamber lined with finely dressed blocks of limestone, the first stone room in the history of architecture. To touch these smooth, cool surfaces in your mind is to touch the transition from the mud brick world of the Predynastic to the eternal stone world of the Old Kingdom. In the archives of the Petrie Museum, we find small, seated statues of Sekhemwy, among the earliest life-sized royal statues in existence. His face is serene, his hands resting on his knees, wearing the tight-fitting robe of the Hebsed festival. He is the king who brought the desert and the valley, the falcon and the beast, back into balance. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the desert wind whispering the names of this dynasty, the kings who wrestled with the shadows and emerged into the light of a new era. The two powers are at peace once more, and the foundations for the third dynasty have been laid in stone. The age of the true giants, the pyramid builders, is now visible on the horizon. Stay here in the cool, silent chambers of Keskemwi's fortress. The tension of the schism has passed, replaced by the rhythmic breathing of a nation that has rediscovered its center. The long night of the Second Dynasty is ending, and the morning of the Old Kingdom is about to break. The horizon of the Second Dynasty has faded into the deep indigo of memory, and as we open our eyes to the dawn of the Third Dynasty, circa 2686 BCE, we find ourselves standing upon the limestone plateau of Saqqara. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of cut stone and the faint, rhythmic chime of copper chisels against rock. We are witnessing the birth of the Old Kingdom, an era that would transform the Nile Valley from a land of mud-brick enclosures into a landscape of eternal stone. At the center of this transformation is a king known to history as Djoser, but known to his contemporaries as Netrikit, the divine of body. To understand the magnitude of what Djoser achieved, we must look beyond the weathered stone we see today and visualize the site through the 3D reconstructions and archaeological maps that preserve its original majesty. Before Djoser, the kings of Egypt were buried in mastabas, flat, rectangular benches of mud brick that sought to mimic the houses of the living. But Djoser, guided by a man of legendary intellect named Imhotep, dared to reach for the celestial heights. Imhotep, the vizier, architect, and physician, would later be deified as a god of wisdom. But here, in the early years of the Third Dynasty, he was the master of a revolutionary vision: to build a stairway that would allow the king's soul to ascend to the North Star. Imagine the step pyramid not as a single monument, but as an evolving masterpiece of experimental engineering. It began as a traditional square mastaba, but through 5 distinct stages of expansion, it rose into a 6-step structure, climbing 60 meters into the sky. This was the world's first large-scale cut-stone construction. Every block of limestone was a testament to a new era of state organization. The Digital Egypt resources remind us that this was not merely a tomb. It was a vast ritual complex, a stone city designed to serve the king for eternity. As we walk through the great colonnade entrance in our mind's eye, feel the coolness of the shade. 40 pairs of limestone columns, carved to resemble bundles of reeds, line the corridor. These were not freestanding, but attached to the walls for support, a sign of architects still learning the limits of stone. Beyond this corridor lies the Great South Court, a vast open space where Djoser would perform the Hebsed festival. Close your eyes and hear the phantom roar of the crowds as the king, even in the afterlife, runs between the semicircular stone markers to prove his physical vigor and his right to rule the two lands. But the true mystery of Djoser lies beneath the surface. Beneath the pyramid is a labyrinthine underworld, a network of tunnels and chambers stretching for nearly 6 kilometers. Descending into these shadows, we encounter something breathtaking: the blue chambers. Here, the walls are covered in thousands of turquoise blue faience tiles, arranged to mimic the reed matting of a royal palace. In the dim light of a torch, these tiles shimmer like the waters of the Nile at dusk. Amidst this celestial blue, we find exquisite lower-leaf carvings of Djoser performing sacred rituals. His face is calm, his stride purposeful, forever caught in a state of divine motion. To touch these tiles is to touch the very soul of the early dynastic transition, a world where the ephemeral materials of the living were being cast into the eternal medium of stone. Further into the darkness lies the Serdab, a small, sealed room containing a life-sized statue of Djoser. The statue sits in eternal silence, dressed in a jubilee cloak and wearing a ceremonial wig. Two small holes were drilled into the wall of the serdab, allowing the king's Ka, spirit, to look out across the temple courtyard and witness the daily offerings. Imagine the gaze of those stone eyes, watching the sun rise and set over Saqqara for over 4,000 years. He is the silent observer of history, the king who bridged the gap between the mortal and the divine. The Digital Egypt archives highlight the significance of the South Tomb, a smaller, secondary burial structure within the complex. Its purpose remains debated, perhaps a symbolic tomb for the king's organs, or a residence for his soul. Its decoration mirrors the blue-tiled splendor of the main pyramid, reminding us that for the Egyptians, the afterlife was a mirror of the world they knew, perfected and preserved forever. The atmosphere of Djoser's reign is one of profound confidence. The state was no longer just managing the flood, it was commanding the landscape. The labor required to quarry, transport, and stack millions of limestone blocks required a level of social cohesion never before seen in human history. The white walls of Memphis were now supported by the stairway of Saqqara. This was the dawn of the age of the pyramids, a time when the king's tomb became the focal point of the national identity. As you drift deeper into the stillness of the night, imagine the shadow of the step pyramid stretching long across the desert sands. The chimneys of the stonecutters' camps are cooling, and the silence of the plateau is broken only by the whisper of the wind. Imhotep's vision has been realized. The king has his stairway. The third dynasty has carved its name into the earth, ensuring that the legacy of Nefertiti would never be forgotten. The stone revolution has begun. But as we will see in our next chapter, the quest for the perfect pyramid would lead the kings of the fourth dynasty, Sneferu, Khufu, and Khafre, to even greater heights as they sought to smooth the steps and touch the very light of the sun. The silhouette of Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara remains a jagged memory against the sky as we travel further into the heart of the fourth dynasty, circa 2613 BCE. The stairway to the stars was only the beginning. The rhythmic sound of the Nile's flood is now accompanied by the immense, synchronized labor of a nation directed by a single, visionary will. Tonight, we encounter the father of the great pyramid builders, a king whose name, Sneferu, echoes through the Digital Egypt archives as a bringer of beauty and a restless seeker of architectural perfection. As we settle into the stillness of this new era, imagine the shifting sands of Midam, a site located on the edge of the Fayum oasis. According to the chronological records of the Petrie Museum resource, it is here that the transition from the Third Dynasty's stepped structures to the Fourth Dynasty's true pyramids truly began. The Midam Pyramid is a haunting monument to trial and error. Originally conceived as a 7- or 8-step structure, it was later encased in smooth limestone to create the first true pyramid. Close your eyes and visualize the sheer scale of this ambition. The builders were attempting to hide the steps, to turn a ladder into a solid slope of light that mirrored the Benben stone of creation. But Midam is a silent witness to the dangers of innovation. Today it stands as a strange, tower-like ruin, its outer casing having slipped away in antiquity. Yet, in the atmospheric stillness of the desert, it remains a vital link in our story. The 3D reconstructions offered by the Digital Egypt project allow us to see through the rubble, revealing the precise internal masonry that supported these early dreams. Near the pyramid, the mastaba tombs of the royal family, such as those of Nefermat and Itet, contain some of the most famous art of the Old Kingdom. Vibrant paintings of geese and intricate scenes of daily life that suggest a court of immense sophistication and wealth. From the experiments at Midam, our journey takes us north to the windswept plateau of Dashur. Here, Sneferu's quest for the perfect form reached a dramatic turning point. Imagine the bent pyramid rising from the horizon. This structure is unique in the world, its angle changing abruptly halfway up. from a steep 54 degrees to a shallower 43 degrees. In the quiet of the night, we can almost hear the whispered consultations between the royal architects as the ground beneath the massive weight began to shift. The cracks in the internal chambers, which we can explore through the digital mapping of the site, tell a story of a crisis averted. Rather than abandoning the project, Sneferu's builders adapted, creating a silhouette that is both a failure of geometry and a triumph of pragmatism. The air at Dashur is thick with the scent of cedar wood, a primary import during Sneferu's reign. The Digital Egypt Chronicles suggest that Sneferu was a king of global reach, sending fleets of 40 ships to the forests of Lebanon to bring back the timber needed for palace doors and the internal beams of his pyramids. This was a king who controlled the resources of a continent, yet his greatest monument was still to come. Not far from the bent pyramid stands the Red Pyramid, so named for the rusty hue of its local limestone core. This is the first successful, true smooth-sided pyramid in history. It is a place of profound silence and mathematical harmony. As we enter its long, descending corridor in our mind's eye, the temperature drops and the sound of the outside world vanishes. The internal chambers feature magnificent corbelled ceilings, stone layers stepping inward to distribute the immense weight of the pyramid above. This was the pinnacle of Sneferu's life's work. He had finally smoothed the steps of Djoser, creating a geometric representation of the sun's rays reaching down to earth. The administrative depth of Sneferu's reign, as reflected in the 3,000 pages of the Petrie Museum resource, reveals a state that was perfectly calibrated. This was the golden age of the Old Kingdom. Sneferu was not remembered as a tyrant, but as a beneficent ruler in later literary traditions. He reorganized the land into estates to fuel the construction of his 3 massive pyramids, a total volume of stone that actually exceeds that of his son Keep's Great Pyramid at Giza. As the desert moon hangs over the Red Pyramid, imagine the logistics of this era. Thousands of workers, supported by a bureaucracy that tracked every loaf of bread and jar of beer, moved mountains of stone. This was not a world of slaves, but of a national project that gave birth to the very concept of Egyptianness. The 14 archaeological sites reconstructed in the Digital Egypt project serve as a testament to this organizational genius, showing how the royal court and the workers' settlements functioned as a single living organism. In the quiet chambers of Dashur, the legacy of Sneferu is one of restless curiosity. He was the bridge between the experimental past and the monumental future. He taught the Egyptians how to build high, how to build smooth, and how to build for eternity. He found the perfect form by embracing the lessons of the bent and the collapsed. As you drift further into sleep, imagine the light of the morning sun hitting the polished white limestone casing of the Red Pyramid, turning it into a beacon of pure light that could be seen for miles across the valley. The search for perfection has reached its goal, but the journey of the 4th dynasty is only intensifying. Sneferu has laid the path. His son, Khufu, is already looking toward the plateau of Giza, where the greatest wonder of the ancient world is about to rise from the bedrock. The stairway to the stars has become a mountain of light. The night is deep, and the pyramids of Dashur stand as silent sentinels over the resting king, a man who transformed the earth to touch the sun. In our next chapter, we will travel to the Giza Plateau, to the foot of the Great Pyramid, where the scale of human endeavor reaches its ultimate breathtaking peak. The transition from the crimson sands of Dashur to the limestone heights of the Giza Plateau marks the moment when the 4th dynasty moved from experimentation to absolute mastery. We have followed the journey of Sneferu, the restless seeker of the perfect form, and now we stand at the threshold of the greatest architectural achievement of the ancient world. Tonight, we immerse ourselves in the reign of Sneferu's son, Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, the man who would command the creation of the Great Pyramid. The Digital Egypt for University's resources drawing on the vast collections of the Petrie Museum, allow us to peer through the veil of time into the logistics, the precision, and the monumental silence of this stone giant. Close your eyes and imagine the Giza Plateau as it was over 4,500 years ago. Unlike the soft sands of Saqqara or the wadis of Dashur, Giza was a solid outcrop of Mokattam limestone, a stable foundation chosen specifically to bear the weight of an eternity. The air is cool and heavy with the scent of the river. The Great Pyramid rises before us, not as the weathered stone we see today, but as a blinding mountain of polished white Tura limestone. Its surface is so smooth that it reflects the silver light of the moon, acting as a celestial beacon for the entire valley. At the very peak sits the Bemban stone, possibly gilded in electrum, catching the first and last rays of the sun. The scale of Khufu's vision is almost impossible to grasp, yet the digital Egypt archives provide the framework to understand its reality. The structure consists of approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. To understand the sheer organization required, visualize the quarrying sites and the 3D reconstructions of the archaeological landscapes that show the symbiotic relationship between the pyramid, the temple, and the harbor. This was not a project of forced labor, but a national mobilization. The state, perfectly calibrated by the innovations of Snefru, now functioned as a single organism, feeding, housing, and directing thousands of skilled craftsmen and seasonal workers. As we enter the pyramid in our mind's eye, the sounds of the desert fade, replaced by a profound, heavy silence. We move through the original entrance on the north face, descending into the dark. The Digital Egypt resource details the complexity of the internal architecture, which is far more intricate than any structure that came before it. We descend deep into the bedrock to a subterranean chamber that was left unfinished, a dark, jagged space that hints at a change in the king's plans. But our journey takes us upward into the heart of the stone. Imagine walking through the Grand Gallery. This is one of the most breathtaking spaces in antiquity. It is a soaring, corbelled corridor, 8 meters high and nearly 50 meters long. The precision of the masonry is so fine that you cannot slide a hair between the joints of the stone. The gallery acts as a majestic ramp, leading us toward the king's chamber. The atmosphere here is thick with the weight of millions of tons of limestone above us. We pass through a series of granite portcullis slabs, ancient security measures designed to seal the king's resting place forever. Finally, we reach the king's chamber. Unlike the rest of the pyramid, this room is constructed entirely of massive blocks of red Aswan granite, transported hundreds of miles down the Nile. At the center lies the sarcophagus, carved from a single block of granite, now empty and silent. Above this chamber, the architects built 5 relieving chambers to distribute the weight of the pyramid, a masterstroke of engineering that has kept the room intact for 45 centuries. The silence in this room is absolute. It is a space designed to exist outside of time, a stone womb for the king's transformation into a star. One of the most enduring mysteries explored in the context of Giza is the alignment of the air shafts. 2 of these narrow vents lead from the king's chamber toward the stars, one toward the circumpolar stars, the indestructibles, and the other toward Orion, the celestial image of Osiris. This alignment, reflected in the astronomical studies within the Digital Egypt resource, suggests that the pyramid was more than a tomb. It was a cosmic machine, a launch pad for the soul to join the eternal cycle of the heavens. The Digital Egypt archives also lead us to the shadows beneath the pyramid, where the Khufu ship was discovered. Imagine a cedarwood boat, over 40 meters long, disassembled and buried in a stone pit for millennia. This vessel, reconstructed with the same precision as the pyramid itself, was intended to carry the king on his journey across the celestial river. The smell of ancient cedar and resin still clings to the idea of this ship, a reminder that the Egyptians saw the afterlife as a mirror of the Nile, requiring the same tools and craftsmanship as the world of the living. As we linger on the plateau, the night wind whispers the stories of the workers' village, located just south of the Giza Wall. Here, the archaeological records reveal the daily lives of the pyramid builders, the bakeries that produced thousands of loaves, the medical facilities where workers received surgery for broken limbs, and the cemeteries where they were buried with honor. This was a community bound by a sacred duty, building a monument that would define their civilization for all of history. Khufu's reign was a pinnacle of the Old Kingdom's power. The 3,000 pages of the Petrie Museum's digital resource document the wealth of the Fourth Dynasty, from the exquisite jewelry of Queen Hedefires to the smallest copper chisels used by the masons. Every object, every stone, and every alignment was part of a grand design to achieve Ma'at, the divine order that kept the universe in balance. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the Great Pyramid as it once was, a shimmering, white mountain of light. The digital Egypt maps show the vastness of the Giza Plateau, a city of the dead that was once vibrating with the life of a great nation. Khufu has achieved his goal. He has built a monument that defies time, a structure that remains the only survivor of the seven wonders of the ancient world. The monumental silence of the king's chamber surrounds you now. The weight of the stone is not a burden, but a shield, protecting the secrets of the Fourth Dynasty. The dawn of the Giza Plateau is still far off, and in the deep night of the Old Kingdom, the Great Pyramid stands as a testament to the heights the human spirit can reach when guided by a single, eternal vision. In our next chapter, we will remain at Giza to witness the legacy of Khufu's successors, Khafre and Menkaure, as they add their own mountains of stone to the plateau and carve the enigmatic Sphinx from the living rock. The monumental silence of Khufu's Great Pyramid still hangs heavy in the air, a stone mountain that redefined the limits of human ambition. But as we remain on the Giza Plateau, the silver light of the moon shifts, illuminating the two other giants that complete this celestial landscape. Tonight, we explore the completion of Giza under the reigns of Khafre and Menkaure, and we stand before the enigmatic gaze of the Great Sphinx. Drawing from the digital Egypt for universities, archives, and the 3D reconstructions of this sacred site, we find a story not just of competition, but of a grand, unified vision that sought to anchor the divine order of the Fourth Dynasty into the very bedrock of the earth. As we settle into the stillness, turn your gaze toward the second pyramid, the monument of Khafre. At first glance, it appears even taller than the Great Pyramid, an optical illusion born of its placement on a higher outcrop of the plateau. Khafre, the son of Khufu, did not seek to outsize his father in volume, but in elegance and elevation. Close your eyes and imagine this pyramid as it appeared in the 26th century BCE. While the casing stones of the Great Pyramid have largely vanished, the Pyramid of Khafre still retains a haunting cap of polished Tyrrell limestone at its peak. This white crown remains a silent witness to the original splendor of the plateau, a reminder of how these structures once shimmered like mirrors under the Egyptian sun. The digital Egypt resources guide us away from the pyramid's peak and down toward its base, where the true architectural secrets of Khafre's reign are revealed. We follow the causeway, a long, enclosed stone corridor that stretched nearly half a kilometer, connecting the pyramid to the Valley Temple. Imagine walking through this corridor in the deep of night. The walls are lined with fine reliefs, and the air is cool. This causeway was more than a path. It was a ritual artery, a transition zone between the world of the living near the Nile and the eternal city of the dead on the plateau. At the end of this path lies the Valley Temple of Khafre, one of the most atmospheric structures in all of Egypt. Unlike the intricate internal chambers of the Great Pyramid, this temple is a masterpiece of monolithic simplicity. The 3D reconstructions allow us to visualize its massive Tyrrell limestone core, clad in enormous blocks of polished red granite brought from the distant quarries of Aswan. As we step into the T-shaped hall in our mind's eye, the silence is profound. The floor is made of white alabaster, and the pillars are square, unadorned granite beams. In the shadows of this hall, archaeologists discovered a series of diorite statues of Khafre, protected by the wings of the hawk god Horus. To touch the cool, dark stone of these statues is to feel the absolute authority of a king who saw himself as the earthly manifestation of the divine. And then there is the Sphinx, carved directly from a limestone outcrop in the quarry that provided stone for the pyramids. The Great Sphinx stands as the eternal guardian of the Giza necropolis. The Digital Egypt archives remind us that the Sphinx was likely part of Khafre's grand design. Its face a stylized portrait of the king himself, merging human intelligence with the raw power of a lion. Imagine standing between its massive paws in the quiet hours before dawn. The Sphinx was once vibrant, painted in shades of red and blue, a colorful titan emerging from the golden sand. It was not merely a statue, it was a cosmic sentinel, facing the rising sun, guarding the threshold of the afterlife. The dream of the Fourth Dynasty was carved into its very features, a dream of eternal vigilance and unchanging order. As the night progresses, we move toward the third and smallest of the Giza giants, the Pyramid of Menkora. Though it stands only 65 meters tall, less than half the height of its predecessors, it represents a shift in philosophy and material. The Digital Egypt resource highlights Menkor's choice to encase the lower 16 courses of his pyramid in expensive red granite. This was an act of immense luxury and devotion. Imagine the labor involved in transporting these massive granite blocks over 500 miles against the current of the Nile. The Pyramid of Menkor feels more intimate, a holy of holies that prioritized the durability and color of the stone over sheer scale. Within the temple complex of Menkor, the Petrie Museum and Digital Egypt, records point to a remarkable series of artifacts, the Menkor triads. These high-relief statues depict the king flanked by the goddess Hathor and various provincial deities. These are among the most refined sculptures of the Old Kingdom, showing a king who was not a distant, solitary figure, but one deeply integrated into the religious and geographic fabric of his nation. The air in Menkor's mortuary temple is thick with the scent of incense and the memory of the daily offerings that were maintained by a dedicated priesthood for centuries after the king's death. The completion of Giza under Menkor marks the end of the Age of the Giants. The 14 archaeological sites reconstructed in the Digital Egypt project, including the workers' town of Hayt el Ghurab, show us that Giza was a living city. Behind the silent stone of the pyramids were thousands of people, bakers, doctors, stonemasons, and priests, all working in a synchronized rhythm to maintain the Ma'at, or divine balance, of the kingdom. The Giza Plateau was the heart of the world, a point where heaven and earth met in a symphony of limestone and granite. As we linger on the plateau, we see the three smaller pyramids standing in a row beside Menkor's monument, intended for his queens. These satellite structures remind us that the pyramid complex was a family legacy, a city of eternity for the entire royal house. The landscape of Giza is now complete. 3 pyramids, 3 valley temples, the silent Sphinx, and a vast sea of mastaba tombs for the high officials who served them. The 3,000 pages of the Petrie Museum's digital resource allow us to appreciate the precision of this era, where every stone was mapped and every ritual was recorded. The Fourth Dynasty has left its mark on the planet in a way no other civilization ever would. They transformed the desert into a sacred geometry, a reflection of the stars upon the sand. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the Giza Plateau as it once was, a shimmering, polychrome city of white limestone, red granite, and golden desert. The shadows of the 3 pyramids stretch across the valley, moving like the hands of a cosmic clock. The work of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkor is finished. The sentinels of Giza are in their places, and the Nile flows quietly past, carrying the legacy of the pyramid builders into the deep currents of time. The monumental era of the Fourth Dynasty is drawing to a close, but the spirit of Egypt is only beginning to evolve. In our next chapter, we will witness the rise of the Fifth Dynasty, where the focus shifts from the mountains of stone to the sun temples of Abu Ghurab, as the kings of Egypt seek a new way to connect with the solar power of Ra. The colossal shadows of the Giza giants begin to stretch long across the desert, marking the end of the Fourth Dynasty's obsession with the sheer volume of stone. As we transition into the Fifth Dynasty, circa 2494 to 2345 BCE, the atmospheric tone of our journey shifts from the monumental to the mystical. The digital Egypt for University's resources, drawing from the detailed records of the Petrie Museum, reveal a profound change in the spiritual and architectural landscape of the Old Kingdom. Tonight, we witness a world where the king's divinity is no longer anchored solely in the size of his tomb, but in his direct, radiant connection to the sun god Ra. Imagine the dawn breaking over the site of Abu Ghurab, just north of the Abu Sur necropolis. The air is still, but the light is different, clearer, more piercing. We are entering an era where the kings of Egypt, beginning with Userkaf, began to identify themselves not just as gods, but specifically as the sons of Ra. This was more than a change in title, it was a revolution in the way the divine was worshipped. The 3D reconstructions of these archaeological sites show us that for the first time, the primary focus of royal building projects shifted away from the pyramid itself and toward a new, unique architectural form, the Sun Temple. Close your eyes and visualize the Sun Temple of Nusair at Abu Ghurab, the most complete and evocative of these structures. Unlike the dark, enclosed chambers of the Giza pyramids, the Sun Temple was an explosion of light and open space. It consisted of a large, paved courtyard surrounded by a massive wall. At the western end stood a colossal, squat obelisk made of limestone, a symbolic representation of the Benben stone, the primordial mound upon which the sun first rose at the beginning of time. This obelisk was not just a monument, it was a lightning rod for the solar power, reflecting the golden rays of Ra across the valley. In the center of this vast courtyard sat a magnificent altar, constructed from 5 massive blocks of alabaster, arranged in the shape of the hieroglyph for Hotep, meaning peace or offering. Imagine the priests of the Fifth Dynasty moving through this space in the rhythmic silence of the morning, preparing sacrifices on an altar that shimmered like water under the sun. The Digital Egypt archives describe the extensive relief carvings that line the corridors of these temples, depicting the cycles of the seasons, the Ake, inundation, the Parate, growing, and the Shimu, harvest. These reliefs suggest that the Sun Temple was a microcosm of the entire Egyptian world, a place where the king ensured that the sun continued to rise and the Nile continued to flow in perfect ma'at. To the south of the obelisk at Abu Ghurab, archaeologists have identified the remains of a massive brick structure in the shape of a boat. This was the solar bark, intended to allow the king to accompany Ra on his eternal journey across the sky. The atmosphere here is one of celestial movement. The temple was a port for the gods, a bridge between the parched earth and the burning sun. As we move south to the necropolis of Abu Sur, the Digital Egypt maps lead us to the pyramids of the Fifth Dynasty kings, Sahur, Neferurker, and Usair. While these pyramids are smaller and less structurally sound than those of Giza, often consisting of a core of rough limestone blocks encased in fine Tura limestone, they are masterpieces of internal decoration. The Pyramid of Sahur, in particular, is celebrated for its exquisite reliefs. As we walk through its dark, narrow corridors in our mind's eye, the torchlight reveals scenes of maritime expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt and military victories in the desert. These are not just historical records. They are magical assertions of the king's power to protect the borders of Egypt and bring back the exotic riches of the world. The Fifth Dynasty also provides us with one of the most significant scientific discoveries in the history of archaeology, the Abusir papyri. These fragments, meticulously documented in the Petrie Museum's research, offer a breathtakingly detailed look at the daily administration of a temple. We can see the duty rosters of the priests, the inventories of temple equipment, and the precise records of the grain and beer delivered for offerings. This is the Noctivara detail, the realization that behind the mystic obelisks and the silent pyramids was a highly sophisticated, functioning bureaucracy. The state was a machine of precision, where even the spiritual survival of the king was subject to the careful accounting of a scribe's reed pen. The atmosphere of this era is one of intellectual and artistic refinement. We see the rise of the high officials like T-Intahotep, whose magnificent mastaba tombs at Saqqara contain some of the most lifelike and detailed scenes of daily life ever carved. In the tomb of T, we can almost hear the lowing of the cattle and the splashing of the fishermen in the papyrus thickets. These officials were the pillars of the Fifth Dynasty, men of high culture who served a king who was now the son of Ra. As the Fifth Dynasty draws to its close, we encounter the reign of Unas, the final king of this line. His pyramid at Saqqara appears modest from the outside, but its interior holds a secret that would change the course of Egyptian religion forever. As we descend into the burial chamber of Unas, the walls are no longer bare stone. They are covered from floor to ceiling with the pyramid texts, the oldest religious corpus in the world. Close your eyes and imagine the flickering light of an oil lamp dancing across thousands of tiny, blue-painted hieroglyphs. These are the spells, incantations, and prayers designed to help the king navigate the perils of the Duat, the underworld, and achieve his place among the stars. The sky weeps for thee, the earth trembles for thee, the texts whisper. This was the birth of the magical word as a primary tool of eternity. The king no longer relied solely on the volume of stone or the brilliance of the sun. He now relied on the power of the written word to command the gods. The Fifth Dynasty was a time of equilibrium. The kings had balanced the monumental weight of the Fourth Dynasty with a new, vibrant solar theology. They had turned the administration of the state into a sacred art form and the walls of their tombs into a library of the soul. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the sun setting behind the great obelisk of Abu Ghurab. The golden light fades into the deep violet of the desert night, and the white limestone pyramids of Abusir become pale ghosts on the horizon. Ra has completed his journey for the day, and he now enters the underworld, guided by the spells carved into the tomb of Unas. The solar era is at its peak, and the digital Egypt archives stand as a witness to this age of light, where the king was the son of the sun and the Nile was the mirror of the heavens. The sun temples are silent now, their alabaster altars cool under the stars. But the legacy of the Fifth Dynasty, the administrative genius, the artistic grace, and the magical power of the pyramid texts, has set the stage for the final act of the Old Kingdom. In our next chapter, we will follow the Sixth Dynasty into the twilight of this first great age of Egypt, witnessing the long reign of Pepi II and the mysterious winds that would eventually blow the sands of the first intermediate period over the fallen monuments of the pyramid builders. The echoes of the pyramid texts from the tomb of Unas still vibrate within the limestone walls of Saqqara, a magical shield designed to carry the king into the eternal embrace of the stars. But as we transition into the Sixth Dynasty, circa 2345 to 2181 BCE, the atmosphere of our journey shifts from the radiant solar majesty of the Fifth Dynasty into a long, haunting twilight. The Digital Egypt for Universities resource, drawing from over 3,000 pages of research and the vast collections of the Petrie Museum, reveals a world where the absolute power of the pharaoh begins to fray at the edges, like an ancient papyrus exposed to the desert wind. Tonight, we witness the final act of the Old Kingdom, a period of immense artistic refinement, daring expeditions, and a slow, agonizing descent into a silence that would last for generations. Imagine the beginning of this new era under King Teddy. The transition is smooth, yet there is an underlying tension in the air. Teddy's pyramid at Saqqara stands as a continuation of the traditions of Unas, its internal chambers shimmering with the same protective spells. But look beyond the royal tomb to the surrounding mastabas of the high officials. The digital Egypt maps and reconstructions show us that these tombs, such as that of the Vizier Kajemni or Mereruka, were becoming increasingly palatial. In the silent, torchlit rooms of Mereruka's mastaba, the reliefs are more lifelike and detailed than ever before. We see hunters in the marshes, craftsmen in the workshops, and dancers moving in rhythmic grace. These officials were no longer just servants of the king. They were the pillars of the state, amassing wealth and influence that rivaled the crown itself. As we move into the reign of Pepi I, the pulse of the kingdom quickens. Pepi I was a vigorous ruler, and his name is forever linked to the capital city. His pyramid complex was called Menefer Pepi. The beauty of Pepi is established, a name that the Greeks would later shorten to Memphis. Through the archives of the Petrie Museum, we see evidence of Pepi I's reach. Copper statues found at Hierakonpolis, representing the king and his son, show a level of metalworking mastery that is breathtaking. These are not the distant, stone icons of the past. They have eyes made of obsidian and rock crystal that seem to track your movement in the dark. The atmosphere of Pepi I's reign is one of expansion and ambition. We hear the stories of Wayne the Elder, a loyal official who rose from a simple storekeeper to a general and judge. In his tomb at Abydos, Wayne records the first large-scale military campaigns into the land of the Sand Dwellers, and the organization of massive transport missions to bring back stone for the royal monuments. The Nile was a bustling highway of state power, but the seeds of decentralization were being sown. The Digital Egypt learning modules highlight that power was shifting toward the provinces, the nomes. The provincial governors, or nomarchs, were no longer buried in Memphis at the king's side. They were building their own eternal homes in the cliffs of Middle and Upper Egypt, at sites like Elephantine and Kubit el Hawa. Imagine the cool, evening air at Elephantine, the gateway to the south. Here lived Harkhuf, a daring explorer and governor. His tomb inscriptions tell of 4 great expeditions into the heart of Africa, into the mysterious land of Yam. The most evocative story is that of a letter written by the young king Pepi II to Harkhuf, expressing his childish excitement at the news of a dancing dwarf, a pygmy, being brought back from the expedition. "Come north to the residence at once," the young king wrote. "Bring this dwarf with you, to gladden the heart of the king." In the quiet of the night, this letter offers a rare, human glimpse into the royal court. A young boy king fascinated by the wonders of the world, unaware of the long, difficult shadows his reign would cast. Pepi II ascended the throne as a child and, according to tradition, ruled for an incredible 94 years, the longest reign in Egyptian history. But as the decades passed, the atmosphere of Egypt changed from vitality to stagnation. Close your eyes and visualize the aging king in his palace at Memphis. While he remained a god on earth, the administration of the state was slowly slipping from his hands. The 14 archaeological sites reconstructed in Digital Egypt show that the royal building projects grew smaller and less innovative during this time. The central authority was being hollowed out by an ever-expanding bureaucracy and the growing independence of the provincial lords. The silence of the later Sixth Dynasty is punctuated by the whispers of environmental change. The Digital Egypt resources suggest that the climate was becoming more arid, and the Nile floods, the heartbeat of Egypt, were becoming increasingly unpredictable. The desert was encroaching on the fertile silt, and for the first time in centuries, the specter of famine began to haunt the land. The tombs of the nomarchs from the very end of the Old Kingdom speak of their efforts to feed the hungry and save their towns in times of crisis. These were the words of men who were now the true protectors of the people as the light of the Pharaoh began to dim. As Pepi II's nearly century-long reign finally came to an end, the kingdom stood on a precipice. The royal line became fragile, and the names of the final rulers, Merenra II and the legendary Queen Nitocris, are shrouded in mystery and legend. Nitocris, described by later historians as the bravest and most beautiful woman of her time, is said to have taken a vengeful end against the conspirators who killed her brother before taking her own life. Whether truth or myth, her story marks the end of an era. The Sixth Dynasty did not end with a sudden explosion, but with a slow, heavy sigh. The white walls of Memphis still stood, and the pyramids of Saqqara still touched the sky, but the divine breath that animated the Old Kingdom was gone. The centralized state, which had achieved the impossible at Giza and Abusir, fragmented into a dozen competing local powers. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the Giza Plateau and the Saqqara necropolis under the light of a fading moon. The great construction projects have ceased. The workshops of the stone cutters are silent, and the sand is beginning to drift against the temple walls. The Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders, the solar kings, and the magical texts, has passed into history. The First Intermediate Period has begun, a time of chaos and darkness for some, but also a time of profound social change and the birth of a new, more personal relationship with the divine. The long twilight of the Sixth Dynasty has settled into night. But even in the darkness, the legacy of the Old Kingdom remains, a stone foundation upon which all of future Egypt would be built. Stay here in the quiet of the desert night, listening to the wind as it whispers through the ruins of the white walls. The first great act is over, and the stage is being set for the rising sun of the Middle Kingdom. The long, heavy silence that followed the death of Pepi II and the fading of the Sixth Dynasty was not the silence of a void, but the quiet of a house whose master has departed, leaving the doors unlocked and the lamps unlit. As we enter the era known to history as the First Intermediate Period, circa 2181 to 2055 BCE, the atmospheric tone of our journey shifts once more. We leave the era of the great pyramid builders and step into a landscape of fragmented mirrors, where the once unified light of the white walls of Memphis has shattered into 1,000 local glimmers. Drawing from the 3,000 pages of the Digital Egypt for University's resource and the archaeological evidence of the Petrie Museum, we find a time that was not merely a dark age of chaos, but a profound period of social evolution, regional pride, and the birth of a more personal relationship with the divine. Imagine the Nile Valley in the years following the collapse of the Old Kingdom. The central authority at Memphis has dissolved, and the divine breath of the pharaoh no longer reaches the distant cataracts. In the absence of a single sun, the stars, the local nomarchs or provincial governors, have begun to shine with their own light. Close your eyes and visualize the high cliffs of Middle Egypt, at sites like Beni Hassan or Kubit el Hawa. Here, the tombs of the local lords are no longer clustered around a royal pyramid. They are carved into the living rock of their own domains, overlooking the towns they ruled with absolute autonomy. The air in these provincial courts is thick with a new kind of confidence. The instruction for King Merekher, a literary masterpiece of this era preserved in the sources, reflects a world where the king must earn his place through justice and wisdom rather than sheer monumental scale. The Digital Egypt archives describe this as a time of decentralization. Without a central treasury to drain the land's wealth for a single tomb, resources remained in the provinces. We see a vibrant explosion of local art, sometimes coarser than the refined court style of Memphis, but filled with a raw, kinetic energy. In the Petrie Museum's collection, the stelae, inscribed stone slabs, of this period show the common people, The soldiers, the brewers, the weavers, depicted with their families, asserting their own right to an eternal life that was once the primary preserve of the elite. But this independence came with a price. The atmospheric stillness is often broken by the sounds of local rivalries. The digital Egypt maps illustrate a divided land, the 9th and 10th dynasties ruling from Heracleopolis in the north, and a rising, ambitious power in the south, the 11th dynasty of Thebes. Imagine the tension at the border between these two kingdoms. The tombs of soldiers from this era, found at sites like Thebes, often contain models of archers and infantry, standing in eternal readiness. The lamentation literature of the time speaks of the desert becoming the river, and the river becoming the desert, metaphors for a world where the social order had been turned upside down. Yet, even in this era of conflict, the Nile continued to flood, and the people continued to dream. The digital Egypt learning modules highlight a significant shift in religion, the democratization of the afterlife. It was during this fractured time that the coffin texts began to appear. No longer were the magical spells for eternity reserved only for the interior of a king's pyramid. They were now painted onto the wooden coffins of anyone who could afford them. Close your eyes and hear the rhythmic chanting of these spells in the dim light of a local chapel. The individual was now responsible for their own journey through the Duat, the underworld, navigating the gates and trials with the help of the written word. The struggle for the soul of Egypt eventually focused on the rugged landscape of Thebes. While the northern kings at Heracleopolis maintained the traditions of the old Memphite court, the Theban princes, the Intefs and the Mentuhoteps, were forging a new, militaristic identity. The digital Egypt reconstructions of the Theban area show a city transforming from a provincial backwater into a formidable capital. Imagine the Theban warriors moving through the narrow wadis, their shields covered in cowhide, their eyes fixed on the dream of a reunited Egypt. The atmosphere of the late First Intermediate period is one of gathering momentum. We encounter the figure of Mentuhotep II, ruler whose reign would eventually end this era of fragmentation. But before the final unification, there were decades of Theban expansion, where the south slowly absorbed the middle provinces. The Petrie Museum's records of pottery and small finds from this time show the gradual standardization of culture as Theban influence spread northward, like a slow-moving tide of order reclaiming the chaotic shores. As you drift deeper into the stillness of the night, imagine the desert wind blowing through the abandoned palaces of Memphis and the vibrant, bustling streets of the new Thebes. The fractured mirror is beginning to be pieced back together. The First Intermediate period has taught the Egyptians that the state could fail, but the culture, the language, the religion, the shared identity of the Nile was indestructible. The long night of regional struggle is nearing its end. The stars of the nomarchs are fading as a new, single sun begins to rise in the south. The Middle Kingdom is on the horizon, a golden age of literature, jewelry, and a redefined kingship that would seek to balance the power of the provinces with the divinity of the crown. Stay here in the quiet of the Theban hills, listening to the echoes of the soldiers' songs and the scribes' prayers. The chaos was but a crucible, and from its fires a stronger, more resilient Egypt is about to emerge. In our next chapter, we will witness the triumph of Mentuhotep II and the dawn of the Middle Kingdom, where the Nile becomes once again the unified artery of a magnificent empire. The echoes of provincial rivalries and the dust of the First Intermediate period have finally settled, as the fractured mirror of Egypt begins to reflect a single, brilliant sun once more. We stand now at the threshold of the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, an era that the digital Egypt for universities, archives celebrate as a renaissance of literature, art, and administrative genius. Tonight, we follow the river south to the rugged cliffs of Thebes, where the dream of a reunited land became a monumental reality. This was a time when the kings of Egypt sought to balance the absolute divinity of the Old Kingdom with a new, more human-centric responsibility toward their people, a concept of kingship that defined the very essence of the Golden Age. Close your eyes and imagine the sight of Deir el-Bahari in the cool, blue shadows of the Theban hills. Before the famous temple of Hatshepsut was even a thought, the landscape was dominated by the unique mortuary complex of Mentuhotep II, the great unifier from the 11th dynasty. According to the chronological maps of the Petrie Museum resource, it was Mentuhotep II who finally defeated the northern rivals at Heracleopolis and bound the two lands together under a single scepter. His temple was a revolutionary design, a series of terraced platforms rising from the valley floor topped, perhaps, by a small pyramid or a primeval mound. As we walk through its groves of tamarisk and sycamore trees in our mind's eye, the silence is profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind against the limestone cliffs. This was the birthplace of the Middle Kingdom's soul, a blend of military strength and deep, spiritual devotion. As the 11th dynasty yielded to the 12th, the atmospheric center of gravity shifted north once again. The first king of this new line, Amenemhat I, chose to move the capital away from Thebes to a new, strategic location called Ichtoi, Caesar of the Two Lands. Although the exact location of this city remains hidden beneath the Nile silt near the Fayum, its presence is felt throughout the 3,000 pages of the Digital Egypt archives. Ichtoi was a city of administration and vigilance, positioned to watch over both the delta and the valley. From this new heart, the kings of the 12th dynasty began a massive project of national reconstruction, restoring the temples, redigging the canals, and ensuring that the Ma'at, the divine order, was firmly established in every corner of the realm. This era was, above all, the golden age of Egyptian literature. In the quiet of the night, imagine a scribe sitting in the shade of a courtyard, his reed pen moving gracefully over a roll of papyrus. The Middle Kingdom gave birth to masterpieces like the story of Sinew, a tale of exile and homecoming that captured the Egyptian imagination for centuries. The language was refined, expressive, and deeply philosophical. The Middle Kingdom gave birth to masterpieces like the story of Sinew, a tale of exile and homecoming that captured the Egyptian imagination for centuries. The language was refined, expressive, and deeply philosophical. The instructions and lamentations found in the sources show a society reflecting on the duties of a ruler and the value of a moral life. The king was no longer just a distant god, he was the good shepherd who kept watch over his flock, a theme depicted in the hauntingly realistic statues of Senusret III and Amenemhat III. Look closely at their stone faces. The heavy eyelids and lined brows speak of a ruler who felt the weight of the crown and the burden of his people's welfare. The atmosphere of the 12th dynasty is also one of immense engineering and ambition. The Digital Egypt 3D reconstructions lead us to the Fayum Oasis, where King Amenemhat III undertook one of the greatest hydraulic projects of antiquity. By channeling the waters of the Nile into the Lake Moeris, he transformed a swampy marsh into a fertile garden, a breadbasket for the entire nation. Near this oasis at Hira, he built his pyramid and a massive mortuary temple so complex that the Greeks would later call it the Labyrinth. Imagine wandering through its thousands of rooms and winding corridors, the air thick with the scent of incense and the mystery of a king who sought to outdo the pyramid builders of the past through sheer architectural complexity. Our journey also takes us to the desert plateau of Dashur and the site of Lahin, where the royal women of the 12th dynasty were laid to rest. It is here that some of the most exquisite jewelry in human history was discovered, the treasure of Lahin. Visualize the shimmering gold, the deep blue of lapis lazuli, and the vibrant red of carnelian, crafted into pectorals and crowns of breathtaking delicacy. These objects, documented in the Petrie Museum's research, reveal a level of craftsmanship that has never been surpassed. They were more than ornaments. They were magical talismans intended to protect the royal body in the afterlife, mirroring the precision and beauty that the kings brought to the administration of the state. To the south, the Middle Kingdom was a time of fortification and expansion. The digital Egypt maps show a line of massive mud brick fortresses built by Senusret III along the second cataract of the Nile in Nubia. Places like Buhin and Semna were not just military outposts. They were symbols of a state that could command the landscape. Imagine the sentries standing on the high walls of these fortresses, looking out over the churning waters of the cataract, guarding the trade routes that brought gold, ivory, and exotic woods into the heart of Egypt. The Nile was a unified highway once more, a silver thread connecting the deep south to the Mediterranean. As the 12th dynasty progressed, the balance between the central crown and the provincial nomarchs was carefully maintained. The local lords at sites like Beni Hassan continued to build magnificent tombs, but they were now firmly integrated into the royal system. The 14 archaeological sites reconstructed in the Digital Egypt project show a kingdom in perfect synchronization. The state was a machine of grace, where the arts flourished, the granaries were full, and the gods were honored in temples that grew more splendid with every reign. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the sun setting over the Fayum, its golden rays reflecting off the waters of Lake Moeris and the white limestone of the Hara Pyramid. The Middle Kingdom is at its zenith. The Golden Age has fulfilled its promise, creating a world where literature, engineering, and art are woven into a single tapestry of order. The whispers of the First Intermediate Period are gone, replaced by the steady, rhythmic pulse of a nation that has rediscovered its greatness. Stay here in the cool, literary quiet of a Middle Kingdom palace. Feel the smooth papyrus between your fingers and the absolute security of a world governed by a king who is both a god and a father. The Golden Age is a sanctuary of the spirit, a peak of human achievement that will stand as a model for all the dynasties to come. The long, peaceful night of the 12th dynasty is at its height, and the legacy of the Middle Kingdom remains a shining beacon in the deep currents of Egyptian history. In our next chapter, we will witness the first shadows of the Second Intermediate Period, as the arrival of the Hyksos from the east challenges the borders of this magnificent empire and prepares the way for the warrior kings of the new kingdom. The golden equilibrium of the Middle Kingdom, that era of literary grace and architectural precision we explored in our last journey, did not vanish in a sudden, cataclysmic explosion. Instead, as the 12th dynasty faded into the 13th, circa 1803 to 1650 BCE, the atmosphere of Egypt changed like a long summer evening, slowly giving way to a restless, uncertain twilight. Drawing from the 3,000 pages of research within the Digital Egypt for University's resource and the archaeological archives of the Petrie Museum, we enter the Second Intermediate Period, a time of fractured sovereignty, foreign kings, and a technological revolution that would forever alter the face of the Nile. Tonight, we leave the peaceful gardens of the Fayum and travel to the eastern edges of the Delta, where the arrival of a people known as the Hyksos began a chapter of history as mysterious as it was transformative. Close your eyes and imagine the eastern Delta 3,700 years ago. The air is humid, thick with the scent of marsh reeds and salt from the nearby Mediterranean. For centuries, people from the Levant, merchants, craftsmen, and laborers, had been settling peacefully in this fertile region. They brought with them new styles of pottery, different gods, and a restless energy. According to the Digital Egypt Chronicles, this was not initially an invasion in the traditional sense, but a gradual migration that shifted the demographic balance of the north. The 13th dynasty, though it boasted many kings, struggled to maintain the absolute control of their predecessors. The central authority at Ichtai began to weaken, and in this power vacuum, a new capital began to rise at a site called Avaris, or Tel El Dabeh. Visualize the city of Avaris through the 3D reconstructions and archaeological maps provided by the sources. It was a cosmopolitan metropolis, a city of the crossroads, where the culture of the Nile met the cultures of the Near East. In the quiet of the night, imagine walking through its narrow streets. You would see Egyptian-style mud-brick houses standing alongside Levantine-style temples with their distinctive thick walls and triple-room layouts. The Petrie Museum's collections of pottery and small finds from this area tell a story of synthesis, of Egyptian scarabs used by foreign officials and Canaanite jars filled with Egyptian wine. This was the seat of the 15th dynasty, the rulers known to history as the Hyksos. The term Hyksos comes from the Egyptian Hyksos, meaning rulers of foreign lands. These were not barbarians intent on destruction. The Digital Egypt resources reveal them to have been sophisticated administrators who adopted the titles, language, and religious customs of the pharaohs. Imagine a king like Kion or the long-reigning Apophis sitting in his palace at Avaris. They wrote their names in hieroglyphs, commissioned Egyptian-style monuments, and worshipped the god Seth, the lord of the desert and storms, whom they identified with their own god Baal. The atmosphere of their court was one of immense wealth and global reach, with trade networks stretching from the Minoan palaces of Crete to the mountains of the Levant. Yet this era brought more than just cultural exchange. It brought a technological revolution. Close your eyes and hear the rhythmic thunder of hooves and the rattle of wood on stone. The Hyksos introduced the horse and the chariot to the Nile Valley, a military innovation that would define the warfare of the new kingdom. They brought the composite bow, more powerful and accurate than the simple wooden bows of the past, and the khopesh, the curved sickle sword that would become a symbol of royal power. The silence of the old Egyptian infantry was now broken by the speed and violence of the chariot charge. These tools of war, documented in the Petrie Museum's research, were the keys to the Hyksos dominance over the north. While the Hyksos ruled from Avaris, the rest of the land was far from unified. The Digital Egypt maps show a kingdom divided into 3 distinct spheres of influence. In the north and Middle Egypt, the Hyksos held sway. In the south, at Thebes, a line of native Egyptian princes, the 17th dynasty, maintained a fragile independence, paying tribute to the north. Further south still, beyond the cataracts, a powerful independent kingdom had risen at Kerma in Nubia. Imagine the tension in the Theban palace, caught between the Asiatics in the delta and the Kushites in the south. The atmosphere was one of suffocating isolation, a once great empire reduced to a provincial rump state. The Noctivara detail of this period is found in the personal and often visceral evidence of the struggle for liberation. In the Petrie Museum's records, we encounter the story of Second and Ratau, a Theban king who dared to defy the Hyksos. Legend speaks of a quarrel between him and the Hyksos king Apophis over the noisy hippopotami in a Theban pool that supposedly kept Apophis awake hundreds of miles away in Avaris. But the reality was far grimmer. The mummy of Second and Ratau, studied by generations of scholars, bears the brutal marks of battle, gaping wounds from a Hyksos-style battle axe. He died fighting for the dream of a unified Egypt, his broken body a testament to the high cost of sovereignty. As we drift deeper into the stillness of the night, imagine the resolve of his successor, Kamose. In a series of famous stelae preserved in the archives, Kamose records his frustration. "I sit between an Asiatic and a Negro. Every man has his slice of this Egypt." In the quiet, torchlit chambers of Thebes, he planned his revenge. He led a fleet north, capturing Hyksos strongholds and intercepting messengers sent between Avaris and the Kushite king. The Digital Egypt reconstructions of the Theban military camps show a nation transitioning from survival to a fierce, outward-looking aggression. The atmospheric climax of the Second Intermediate Period is the final siege of Avaris led by Kamose's brother, Amos I. Imagine the scale of the conflict. the Theban fleet filling the delta branches, the chariots clashing on the sandy plains, and the final, desperate defense of the Hyksos capital. The sources describe the eventual expulsion of the Hyksos, not just from avarice, but pursued all the way to their fortresses in the southern Levant. The shadow in the delta was finally lifted. Stay here in the cool, expectant air of the newly liberated delta. The Hyksos are gone, but their legacy remains. They left Egypt with the tools of a superpower, the chariot, the bow, and a new militaristic outlook on the world. The fragmented land has been forged back together in the fires of conflict. The Second Intermediate Period has ended, but it has birthed something entirely new. The long night of division is over, and the sun is rising on the new kingdom, the age of the empire, the warrior pharaohs, and the unparalleled splendor of the 18th dynasty. In our next chapter, we will follow Ahmose I and his successors as they transform Egypt from a kingdom of the river into the dominant power of the ancient world, beginning the era of Thutmose, Hatshepsut, and the magnificent temples of Karnak. The thunder of the chariots has finally faded into a rhythmic pulse, and the smoke over the ruined walls of Avaris has cleared to reveal a sky of brilliant, unfiltered gold. The long, fractured night of the Second Intermediate Period is over. As we step into the 18th dynasty, circa 1550 BCE, the atmospheric tone of our journey reaches a crescendo of triumph and renewal. Drawing from the 3,000 pages of the Digital Egypt for University's resource and the monumental records of the Petrie Museum, we witness the birth of the new kingdom, the age of the Egyptian Empire. Tonight, we follow the young liberator Ahmose I as he weaves the scattered threads of the Nile back into a single, magnificent tapestry of power. Close your eyes and imagine the air in Thebes, now the undisputed heart of a resurrected nation. It is thick with the scent of celebratory incense and the freshness of the rising Nile. Ahmose I did not merely inherit a throne. He forged one from the fires of the liberation war we witnessed in our last chapter. He was the son of the martyred Seqenenre and the brother of the fierce Kamose, carrying the weight of a dynasty that had refused to bow. According to the Digital Egypt Chronicles, Ahmose's victory at Avaris was only the beginning. To ensure that the shadow in the delta would never return, he pursued the retreating Hyksos into the southern Levant, laying a 3-year siege to the fortress of Sharuhan. Visualize the resolve of the Egyptian army, now a professional force of chariot-borne elites, securing the northeastern gateway to the world. But the restoration of Egypt was not achieved by the sword alone. In the quiet, torchlit chambers of the palace, we find the true architects of the new kingdom's stability, the royal women. The Petrie Museum's records highlight the unprecedented status of Queen Ahmose Nefertari, the wife and sister of Ahmose I. She was the first to hold the title of God's wife of Ammonius, a position of immense economic and religious power that anchored the royal house to the rising cult of the Theban god. Imagine her in the cool of the evening, her linen robes shimmering with gold, overseeing the vast estates dedicated to the temples. She was more than a queen. She was a pillar of the state, revered for centuries after her death as a patron goddess of the Theban necropolis. The atmosphere of the early 18th dynasty was one of partnership between the divine king and the sacred queen, a duality that ensured the Ma'at would never again be shattered. As we look across the landscape of this new era, the Digital Egypt 3D reconstructions lead us back to the ancestral sands of Abydos. It is here that Ahmose I left a monument that serves as a profound bridge between the past and the future. He built the last royal pyramid in Egyptian history. Unlike the stone mountains of Giza, this was a symbolic structure, part of a vast complex that included a cenotaph for his grandmother, the indomitable Queen Tedeshri. Imagine standing before this pyramid in the moonlight, its limestone casing reflecting the stars, a final, graceful nod to the Old and Middle Kingdom traditions before the kings of the New Kingdom chose to hide their tombs in the secret shadows of the Valley of the Kings. This was an era of memory and rebirth, where the new empire sought legitimacy by honoring the foundations of the old. The Noctivara detail of Ahmose' reign is found in the administrative rebirth documented in the Digital Egypt learning modules. After decades of division, the land had to be remapped, the canals re-cleared, and the bureaucracy re-established. Ahmose was a master of logistics. He rewarded the braves of his army, men like Ahmose, son of Abana, whose tomb at El Kab preserves the vivid story of the Hyksos Wars, with grants of land and gold. This created a new military aristocracy, a class of loyal officials who owed their status directly to the crown. The atmosphere of the kingdom was one of meritocracy and movement. The white walls of Memphis were restored, but the spiritual and political energy remained in Thebes, the city of the scepter. Turn your gaze now to the banks of the Nile at Karnak. Before it became the sprawling forest of stone we know today, it was a modest temple to the god Ammonius. Under Ahmose I, the Hidden One, began his ascent to become Ammonius Ra, the king of the gods. The king dedicated the spoils of his wars, gold from Nubia, silver from the north, and cedar from Lebanon, to the expansion of this sacred precinct. Imagine the sound of the mason's chisels and the chanting of the priests in the early morning mist. The alliance between the pharaoh and Ammonius was the engine of the new kingdom. The god provided victory in battle, and the king provided the god with the most magnificent temples on earth. The Digital Egypt maps show a kingdom that was no longer content to sit behind its borders. Ahmose I led expeditions deep into Nubia, reclaiming the fortresses of the Middle Kingdom and securing the gold mines that would fund the empire's splendor. The Nile was once again a unified highway, but now it was a highway that led outward into the wide world. The atmosphere was one of cosmopolitan curiosity. Exotic goods, lapis lazuli, incense, strange animals, and new technologies flowed into the markets of Thebes. The Egyptians had learned from the Hyksos that to be safe, they must be strong, and to be strong, they must be an empire. As the reign of Ahmose I drew to its close, he had accomplished the impossible. He had expelled the foreign rulers, reunited the two lands, and established a dynasty that would produce some of the most famous names in history. The Petrie Museum's collection of small finds, the scarabs, the jewelry, and the pottery, from this transition period shows a society vibrating with a new, refined aesthetic. The art was elegant, the craftsmanship was precise, and the spirit of the nation was one of absolute confidence. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the sun setting behind the Theban hills, casting a long, purple shadow over the newly built temples of Karnak. The radiant restoration is complete. The Nile flows quietly, its waters reflecting the torches of a nation that has finally found its peace. Ahmose I, the Moonborn, has fulfilled his destiny. He has cleared the path for his successors, Amenhotep I and the great Thutmose, to transform this liberated land into a global superpower. Stay here in the cool, triumphant quiet of the early 18th dynasty. Feel the weight of the new gold and the smoothness of the fresh linen. The long night of the Second Intermediate Period is a distant memory, and the dawn of the empire is here. The foundations are strong, the borders are secure, and the spirit of Egypt is soaring toward its ultimate, breathtaking peak. In our next chapter, we will walk through the gates of the new kingdom at its height, witnessing the rise of the first great woman of history, Hatshepsut, and the military genius of the Napoleon of Egypt, Thutmose III, as they take the glory of the Nile to the very ends of the earth. As the last embers of our journey through the silent dawn and the rise of the new kingdom begin to fade, we find ourselves standing once more on the banks of the eternal Nile. We have traveled across 3,000 years of human endeavor, from the humble, rippled pottery of the Badarian settlers to the towering stone mountains of Giza, and finally to the radiant restoration of Amos I. The story of ancient Egypt is not merely one of kings and monuments, but of a persistent search for Ma'at, the divine balance that keeps the stars in their courses and the river in its bed. Through the 3,000 pages of research and the meticulous archaeological records of the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology, we have glimpsed the faces of those who lived, dreamed, and built for eternity. The Digital Egypt for Universities resource has allowed us to walk through 3D reconstructions of a world that once was, turning the silent dust of the desert back into the vibrant white walls of Memphis. As you linger in the stillness of the night, let the images of the Step Pyramid, the shimmering sun temples, and the golden treasures of Lahan drift through your mind like the soft silt of the river. The history we have shared is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a legacy carefully preserved by scholars like Wolfram Grudetsky and Stephen Quirk, whose work continues to illuminate the shadows of the past. The Nile flows on, carries the whispers of the Pharaohs into the deep sea of time. The sun has set on our journey for tonight, and the stars, the indestructibles, are now your only guides. Rest now in the absolute peace of the valley, knowing that the story of Egypt is never truly finished. It simply waits in the silence for the next dawn. Thank you for joining us on Noctivara Stories. If this journey has brought you peace, consider subscribing to join our future explorations through the corridors of time. But for now, let the darkness be your sanctuary. Sleep deeply. Sleep in the embrace of the ancients. Good night.